Da li je Hitler zaista umro 1945. u Berlinu? Kada je Truman te godine pitao Staljina da li je Hitler mrtav, ovaj odgovorio ne. Kasnije, 1952. Eisenhower će reći nemamo nikakav pouzdan dokaz da je Hitler mrtav. Da li je u stvari teorija zavere da je Hitler preživeo Drugi svjetski rat i da je umro u dubokoj starosti negde u Južnoj Americi? Ili je zavera svetskih obaveštajnih službi i kompanija koje su sarađivale sa nacistima to što su pomagali, a zatim i uspešno skrivali činjenicu da je Hitler pobegao iz Nemačke 1945. Za novinare Jerarda Williamsa i filmskog producenta za ratnu istoriju Simona Dunstana, autora knjige Sivi Vuk, bekstvo Adolfa Hitlera, koje je objavljeno u Srbiji u izdanju izdavačke kuće Admiral, nema dileme. Previše je dokaza da je Hitler lažirao svoju smrt, tvrde. Otkriće da je čuvena Hitlerova lobanja u Moskvi u stvari ženska i neki dokumenti sa kojih je skinuta oznaka tajnosti bili su za ovu dvojicu autora povod da krenu u istraživanje dugo 5 godina. Na više od 300 strana ređaju se podaci i svedočenju u prilog teorije da je Hitler pobegao avionom iz Nemačke, zatim do Danske pa preko Španije do Argentine. Tamo je, uvereni su, i umro 13. februara 1962. godine u 73. godini života, ostavljajući za sobom 2 ćerke sa Evom Braun. Prema zvaničnoj istoriji od Amerike preko Britanije do istoka Evrope, vođa Rajha izvršio samoubistvo 30. aprila 1945. u berlinskom bunkeru zajedno sa Evom Braun, da bi zatim njihova tela bila spaljena. Ono što će probuditi sumnju, ne samo kod autora ove knjige, jeste da ostaci nikada nisu pronađeni ili da su pak bili lažni. Jerard Williams, jedan od autora, ugledni britanski novinar koji je godinama radio kao izveštač iz mnogih zemalja za najuglednije britanske medije poput BBC-a i Sky News-a. Intervju sa njim televizija Pančevo napravila je prošle godine prilikom promocije knjige i u Pančevu. Razne teorije, ideje, uverenja, dokazi postoje o tome da li je Hitler stvarno umro, da li se ubio, a zatim spaljen 30. aprila 1945. godine ili je uspeo da pobegne. Ono što je privuklo pažnju svetske javnosti, a i srpske, od ove godine jeste knjiga Sivi Vuk, bekstvo Adolfa Hitlera. I mi razgovaramo sa gospodinom Jerardom Williamsom, jednim od autora te knjige. Dobar dan, dobrodošli.
Dobar dan.
Pitanje je ubeđenja uglavnom kod ljudi. Da li veruju ili ne veruju u to da li je stvarno Hitler nastradao 30. aprila 1945. godine, pošto dokaza konačnih i definitivnih o tome nema. Ali je pitanje da li ima dokaza o tome da je on uspeo da pobegne. I vi ste verovali da su to možda teorije zavere o tome da je on uspeo da pobegne, ali je bio sigurno neki trenutak ili neki možda ključni dokaz koji je promenio vaše ubeđenje. Šta je vas ubedilo, koji je to trenutak ili koji su to bile stvari koje ste čuli ili vidjeli da su vas ubedile da je on uspeo da pobegne?
Grey Wolf has been almost 6 years in the research. There was no one pivotal moment when we thought, gosh, this is it. What there was a build-up of more and more and more evidence in Argentina and in Germany and from American files and other sources that made us believe that the story we have always been told wasn't the truth. It was a lie. We know now that there is no forensic evidence at all to Adolf Hitler's death in the bunker in Berlin. The skull fragment, which the Russians have always said was Adolf Hitler's, has been DNA tested, and it is that of a woman, and it's not that of a young woman, so it cannot be Eva Braun's either. We had testimony from the pilot who flew them out of Berlin on April 28, 1945. We have information from the Russian forces who found the underground bunker and the escape tunnel into the underground railway system in Berlin that was used by the Hitler and Eva Braun and General Fegelein. And we have eyewitness after eyewitness in Argentina to say that he survived and lived there until 1962 when he died.
Kako je u stvari da onima koji nisu pročitali knjigu, kako je izgledao u stvari taj beg i kako je bilo moguće, znači jeste, on je podzemnim kanalima, to su mnogi i drugi tvrdili da je uspeo podzemnim kanalima da se izvuče prvo iz bunkera, a zatim je tu sledila storija o prvo begu avionom, pa zatim brodom, pa podmornicom, znači postoji istorija kako i vaša teorija na osnovu čega je zasnovana, kako je uspeo da stigne do Argentine u stvari.
He was picked up, well, the easiest way to explain it is he left the Führer bunker, the original Führer bunker, went to his own quarters in the Chancellery building, And in the Chancery building, there was a sliding piece of concrete which hid a secret door. This door led down to another bunker underground, well away from the Führer bunker, and there was a tunnel from that bunker into the underground railway system in Berlin, the U-Bahn system in Berlin. They walked for about 7 miles, 8-9 kilometers, to another underground station, Fehrbelliner Platz, which comes up into a huge boulevard, a huge road called the Hohenzollern-Damm, which is wide enough for an aircraft to come down and take off and land. They were then picked up by a Captain Peter Baumgart flying a Ju-52 aircraft and flown to Tonder in Denmark, which used to be the Imperial Zeppelin base in World War I. That's where Captain Baumgart left them. It was Adolf Hitler, Eva Braun, General Fegelein, Eva Braun's sister, and another general called Romer, who we don't have much information of, but we think was probably Fegelein's commanding officer in Budapest. From Tonder, they were flown to Travemünde on the coast, and there they picked up a long-range Ju-252 aircraft, which flew them to just outside Barcelona in Spain. That aircraft we know was dismantled when they arrived there. They were flown in a Spanish aircraft down to the Canary Islands at Fuerteventura. And there they waited until 3 U-boats from the last U-boat pack of World War II, known as Seawolf, came to pick them up. 53 days later, going underwater all the way, submerged all the way, using a snorkel, they arrived on the coast of Argentina, where they were met by many of their supporters and friends.
Istoričari su vašu knjigu često nazivali, neki od njih, čak i đubretom, i smatraju je u stvari neistoričnim delom i da ne postoje dokazi. Drugi su bili zainteresovani i kazali su, pošto je u pitanju ozbiljan čovjek, ozbiljan novinar, pa su s pažnjom čitali knjigu, ali mnogi niste uspeli da ubedite da je Hitler na taj način uspeo da pobegne. Šta biste vi tim ljudima rekli, šta su ključni dokazi da je Hitler na taj način uspeo da pobegne?
I didn't want to believe this story either. When I started doing this story, it was just going to be a silly conspiracy theory documentary. That's all it was going to be. As we looked into it, we found the information from reports at the time, from reporters, from people like the Associated Press, from Reuters, both of whom agencies I've worked for in the past and trust their judgment and their news values. If people don't want to believe what's in Grey Wolf, it's up to them. But what they need to do is read what we have presented. This is a presentation of facts. We haven't made anything up. This is not a conspiracy theory book. This is a conspiracy. There was a conspiracy to allow Adolf Hitler, Martin Bormann, Gestapo Müller, and almost 100,000 other Nazis, Ustashi, Belgian fascists, French fascists, all to escape at the end of the war. And they were enabled with the help of American intelligence and American business and banking, who had supported the Nazis from 1936 anyway. If it hadn't been for American money, the Nazi Party would never have come to power. American business and banks put $1 billion into the Nazi Party in 1937. It was equivalent to 1 year's GDP of the United States. People can say I'm crazy. People can say this is trash. I've been a journalist now for 34 years. I've covered most of the major events of the latter part of the 20th century, the fall of the Soviet Union, Rwanda, the Iraq wars twice, 2.5 years here in Yugoslavia during 1991 and 1993, covering the Bosnian War. I'm a serious journalist. I have maybe not a very famous reputation, but I have a reputation that is important to me. And a lot of my friends told me, don't write this book, Jerard. It's going to ruin your reputation. People will think you're mad. People will think you're completely nuts, mate. But this is a story that needs telling. This is what we have found out. This isn't an attempt to make money. This isn't an attempt to change history. This is no attempt to make Adolf Hitler a hero. This is one of the most evil, vicious, criminal minds of the 20th century. But what we have found out is true. We haven't made it up. So those people who accept the original history, which was written by one British historian, Hugh Trevor Roper, he was chosen by British intelligence to write this history. All he had ever written before was a biography of an archbishop, a medieval archbishop, He had no detective knowledge. He had no forensic knowledge. He'd never worked in the police. He had never worked in military intelligence, not in gathering military intelligence. But this was the man that British intelligence chose to write The Last Days of Hitler. His two major witnesses, Hannah Reich, who was Hitler's favourite pilot, his female pilot, and the Luftwaffe adjutant in the bunker. He said he spoke to both of them. Hannah Reich said she never spoke to him. And von Bülow, who was the Luftwaffe adjutant, said that every time after the war he read the book, he used to laugh because Trevor Roper accepted everything he'd said, and it was all lies. Now, what do you say when there is no forensic evidence? Habeas corpus, show me the body. Give me proof that Hitler died in Berlin in 1945, along with Eva Braun. Gestapo Müller also was supposed to be dead in Berlin in 1945. And his family, this is the head of the SS police Gestapo. So his family buried him in a grave, and they had a lovely little headstone set up saying, "To our dear daddy." Our dear daddy was responsible for the deaths of tens of thousands of people. Well, they dug that grave up in 1963, and inside there were bits of 3 bodies. None of them could have been Gestapo Müller, but he was dead. According to the German government, he was dead. Martin Bormann, same thing, dead in Berlin in 1945. And yet he wasn't, because we have eyewitness after eyewitness who saw him in Germany, who saw him in Austria, who followed him down through Italy to his escape, and then who saw him in Argentina after the war. We've been lied to all the while.
Svedoci koji tvrde da su vidjeli Hitlera, uključujući njegovu sekretaricu i ostale, vi kažete da su oni u stvari vidjeli dvojnika. U čemu je stvar bila? Jer postoje također svedoci koji tvrde da su vidjeli Hitlera kroz vrata sobe i da je on počinio samoubistvo i da kasnije do duše osim Millera niko nije vidio spaljivanje.
Every single one of those testimonies is slightly different. Some people heard the shot, but it's now been proved that you could not have heard the shot. The walls were too thick. Some people say they saw the bodies in there. Some people say they didn't. Some people say they were helping them carry them outside. Every story is different. What we believe happened is that 2 people did die in the bunker, but they were not Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun. They were the doubles of Adolf Hitler and Eva Braun, the doppelgangers. Now that sounds like a very easy thing just to say. It wasn't Hitler, it was a double. But we have had the last pictures of Hitler where he is giving out medals to the Hitler Youth in Berlin, shot on March the 20th, 1945. We have had those pictures checked by the top forensic scientist in Great Britain. He's a professor of medical physics at University College London, Alf Linney. And Alf is completely convinced, scientifically, that the double that we're watching give the medals to, which everybody has always believed is Hitler, is not Adolf Hitler. So we know that in Berlin, in the late part of the war, there was a double who looked like Hitler, who acted like Hitler, and was accepted, even by the head of the Hitler Youth, as being Hitler. The people in the bunker saw what they were meant to see. It's that classic magician's trick, the sleight of hand. You see what you think you want to see. And Gestapo Müller and Martin Bormann had planned this very carefully. I think they wanted Hitler to leave earlier, and he wouldn't. So in the end, they had only one last chance to get him out. And I think they wanted to show people bodies, which they thought the people in the bunker would have thought was Hitler and Eva Braun. So they callously executed these 2 people and took those bodies upstairs. But there the story becomes even more confusing, because they were supposed to have been completely burnt, petrol poured over them and set fire to. But you cannot do that to a human body. To burn a human body thoroughly, you need to get to an enormous temperature. And the bodies of Joseph and Magda Goebbels had been burnt with petrol and were found by the Russian troops when they arrived. And they were recognizably Joseph and Magda Goebbels. And they were in the same garden in the Chancellery where Eva and Hitler were supposed to have been burnt and their bodies destroyed. There's no evidence. Stalin always said that Hitler had escaped to Spain or Argentina. General Eisenhower in 1952 was asked, "So what happened to Hitler?" And he said, "We have no idea. We've got no proof. My Soviet friends don't know, and we don't know." So if somebody could prove me wrong, I would be so happy to be proved wrong. I would disappear, go and live in obscurity in faraway New Zealand or Canada or something, because I'm wrong. But what we have found out is more of the truth than anything we've ever been told before. And this isn't a work of fiction, this isn't a conspiracy theory. This exposes the biggest cover-up of the 20th century.
Intrigantna je istina, je ubeđenost, da tako kažem, zvanične istorije, da je Hitler stvarno se ubijen tada u Berlinu, imajući u vidu da je to prosto nedokazivo. I to će mnogi poverovati. Ali ono što će oni reći i pitati vas, a gde je vama dokaz, gde je vama DNK, i da postoje mnoga pitanja od toga. Gde su ti silni svedoci koji su Hitlera videli u Tonderu ili u Danskoj ili posle u Španiji pre nego što je otišao? Gde su fotografije, pošto se fotografisao, kažete u knjizi da je volao da se fotografiše, to je bilo u jednom periodu kad je bio na lečenju. Zatim da je imao 2 kćerke, gde su one sada, zašto niko od svedoka ne govori, navodno im je prećeno smrću, i onda će pitati zašto se prosto niko ne pojavi ko bi mogao da kaže nešto više o tome, iako i oni prosto imaju teoriju koja nije dokaziva.
We need to start off with the man who flew them out of Berlin, Captain Peter Baumgart. Baumgart was, in fact, interesting enough, he was a South African with a British passport, a German who had been born in South Africa under British rule and came back to live in Germany when Germany was under the Nazis and becoming strong again. Baumgart was arrested and tried by the Polish authorities in Warsaw, and the transcript and reports of his trial remain to this day. When he was asked what he had done during the war, he said, "I flew Hitler out of Berlin." And he said how he had flown him out and where he had flown them out to. And the Polish judge said, "You're completely mad," and sent him away for psychiatric testing. 6 months later, he came back and he had been tested by 3 senior Polish psychiatrists, and they said, "This man is not mad, he is saying what he believes to be the truth." And he repeated his story and gave more details. Now, this was published all over the world at the time, in small amounts by Reuters, by the Associated Press, who covered the story. In Grey Wolf, we thought that this man had disappeared in 1951 when he was released from prison in Warsaw. What we've now found out is that he was flown the next day from Frankfurt to America as a State Department guest. So the Americans immediately snatched this pilot as soon as he was out of Polish jurisdiction, took him to America, where he disappears. We have dozens of eyewitnesses in Argentina who saw Hitler after the war. None of these people have been paid. They're all reliable witnesses. They all tell stories which don't cover each other at the same time. So you will have a story in 1946, you'll have a story in 1950, 1952, but they all place him in different places doing different things. And the descriptions of him are quite amazing, and what he is doing at the time. So this is all thoroughly documented in the book. We also have FBI reports of sightings of Hitler and Eva Braun in Argentina, a CIA report of Hitler and Eva Braun in Argentina. Much of this material is still not available to us. In Britain, they have stamped everything secret for another 50 years. So it will be 50 years before the British files are released. The witnesses in the bunker were all Nazis. They had all, on oath, promised to worship Hitler until their own death. Our witnesses are not Nazis. These are normal people. There is one example of a carpenter who worked for Ante Pavlich, the Ustashi leader, who was running a building firm in Mar del Plata in 1953. And the man's name is Hernan Nansen, and he worked for Pavlich for about 9 months. Hitler visited Pavlich 5, maybe 6 times in that period. And we have on tape a video report, video interview with Hernan Nansen, and he explains how they shook hands and how they acted, what Eva Braun looked like, how ill Hitler was looking. He talks about what Pavlich was like after the war, before Pavlich was shot and eventually died in Madrid. I have no reason to disbelieve these people. I have an interview with a man called Roberto Brun, who was a young waiter in a very private naval hotel in Buenos Aires. He waited on Hitler twice, in 1952 and on 1955, and both times Martin Bormann was there. And executives from Siemens, the German company, were also there at the time. There would be no reason to make these stories up. In fact, 2 of our witnesses in Argentina have had their lives threatened. They've had death threats against them for telling us what they know. Even now, the spider's web of the organization that Martin Bormann set up is still active in Argentina. There is a lot of money to protect. The Nazis stole billions, and they transmitted it from Switzerland, where the Swiss took their 6%, to Argentina, and then after the war, it all went back to Germany, or the majority of it went back to Germany. So there is no reason for my witnesses to lie. There's no reason for these people to, especially when they've been threatened, to tell me stories like this. So people need to make their own mind up whether our material is valid and honest, or whether we are just trying to, I don't know what we would be trying to do. We're not trying to make this man a hero. He dies tormented, demented, and betrayed by his closest circle. His wife has left him. The kids go as well. She takes the kids with them. People need to read it and make their own mind up. I know what I believe. I've been a journalist a long time. I wouldn't have printed this. I wouldn't have written this book if I wasn't sure that Adolf Hitler escaped.
Bio interes ogroman novac, tako kažete, u to doba. Da li to i danas sprečava i da se otvore, i dalje su mnogi delovi arhiva u FBI-u i u CIA zatvoreni? Da li i danas taj novac od nacista ima uticaja da se do kraja ne otvore arhive, jer dokumenti su ipak šturi koje su oni ponudili javnosti na uvid tek pre nekoliko godina, koji su danas interesi da se o tome više čuti i dalje čuti?
A lot of the companies involved, Siemens, Mannesmann, Thyssen, BASF, Bayer, Hugo Boss, a lot of the companies involved still have a great interest in this story not being told. American intelligence and American banking and American industry also has an interest in this story not being told. People don't know facts like the Ford Motor Company of America, Henry Ford, who was a Nazi. He held Hitler's highest domestic decoration. And his writings, his anti-Semitic writings against the Jews in the 1920s, went on to form a lot of Adolf Hitler's ideas. The Ford Motor Company made 1/3 of all the trucks used by the German army during World War II, and the profits went back to Detroit. ITT, again a huge American company, owned 25% of the Focke-Wulf company, which made fighter aircraft, which was shooting down British and American bombers over Germany. At the end of the war, American pilots were told throughout the war, you cannot bomb these factories. But at the end of the war, somebody made a mistake, saw targets of opportunity, and bombed the Ford and the Focke-Wulf factories in Germany. Well, both ITT and Ford took the American government to court after the war and were given millions of dollars in reparations because their plants had been bombed in Nazi Germany. The involvement, the detailed web of how these people work together is fascinating. They don't care about human beings. They don't care about 6 million Jews, 1 million Serbs, God knows how many Russians and Poles which were murdered by these people. All they cared about was making money. And that's all they care about today as well. I'm not saying these companies are Nazi-controlled, because they're not anymore. But the money that was used to build them, the foundations upon which they were built, comes from a very evil time in their history and comes from money that didn't necessarily belong to them.
Volio bih da popričam o tome kako izgledao taj život nacista u Argentini, ali pre toga možeš samo još jednu stvar da vas pitam oko toga kako, da li, zašto se više nije otkrilo. Da li je moguće da Mossad nije otkrio na kraju kraja gde je Hitler i da Simon Wiesenthal o tome nije baš govorio ili se time nije bavio? Kako je to moguće? Jer Eichmann je uhvaćen, za Mengele nije uhvaćen, ali znamo da je umro na plaži od srčanog udara 1979. Zna se, ima dokaza da je Klaus Barbie bio također u Južnoj Americi. Kako je moguće da Mossad i Wiesenthal nisu nešto više našli u njegovom boravku?
Let's deal with Mossad first and the Israeli state. Before Israel became a country in 1948, the Haganah, the Israeli forces, had gathered so much material on American involvement in Nazi Germany that Ben-Gurion sent them to America and said, we have files this big on what you guys have been up to. And Nelson Rockefeller said, well, you have two choices. You can have vengeance or you can have a country. And that's what Israel was left with. It had a choice. It could have vengeance against the Nazis, or it could have American support to get them into the United Nations to be a recognized state. And that's what they got. In Mossad's history, in the book about Mossad's history, I think it's 300 pages long, 3 pages are dedicated to Nazi hunting, and it's mainly about Eichmann. West German intelligence and American intelligence knew where Eichmann was living from 1952. The files have recently been released. They knew he was living in Buenos Aires as Ricardo Clements. Simon Wiesenthal always took credit for Eichmann's capture. But the true story, which is in the book and has been in the Guardian newspaper and lots of other places, is that it was a Jewish man living in Buenos Aires whose daughter was going out with Eichmann's son, Horst Eichmann. And she came home and told her dad, who was a secular Jew, not really living as a Jew, and said, "Dad, I'm going out with this guy, Horst Eichmann." He said his dad was a senior Nazi in Germany during the war. And he said, "Eichmann?" He said, "Yeah, but his father's actually called Ricardo Clements. But he lives with Mrs. Eichmann and the 2 Eichmann children." And so this man thought, that's very strange, managed to get a picture of him, sent the picture off to the prosecutors in Frankfurt, who passed it on to the Israelis. And the Israelis went, "Nah, we're not going. No interest at all." So the man did this a second time and threatened to cause more trouble. And the Israelis this time sent an agent to Buenos Aires. And the agent arrived in Buenos Aires and went to where the Eichmanns were living and went back to Israel and said, no, they're all really nice people there. There's no Nazis in Argentina. Ridiculous. And then this man threatened to go public to the American newspapers because Eichmann and the Holocaust, the story had begun to leak out properly. So the Israelis came in and snatched him. But it had nothing at all to do with Simon Wiesenthal. Wiesenthal did some great work, and I'm not going to discredit a man who did great work. But he was also a self-publicist, and there's also become a myth around Wiesenthal. When you think that 100,000 Nazis escaped to South America at the end of World War II, how many were captured? Eichmann, Klaus Barbie. Well, Klaus Barbie was working for the CIA mainly in Bolivia, and they gave him up. So I can't think of any others. Eichmann, Klaus Barbie, maybe 2 or 3 others. But Argentina, Tito, Josip Broz Tito, wanted to have Pavlich and the whole cabinet extradited from Argentina. They were living openly in Argentina, these Ustashi pigs. And General Perón said, no, you can't have them. And every time somebody put in a request for a Nazi to be extradited back from Argentina, where they lived openly, a lot of them, Perón just went, no, not interested. So the idea of Nazi hunting after the war is very limited. It's become a big myth. It's become a big heroic myth. But that's all it is. It's a heroic myth. They didn't really go after them. And why would they? They had too many enemies. Israel was surrounded by enemies. They had too many problems at home to waste resources. And they had done a deal with America anyway. They had a state. They couldn't have revenge as well.
Očigledno je da su Peronovi mnogo volili naciste, naročito njihov novac. Ti bolesni umovi, koji su sigurno jedni od najbolesnijih umova 20. veka, kada čitamo sada o njihovom životu u Argentini, oni su se, bilo je nemoguće napraviti 4. rajh, očigledno, ali oni su se prilagodili nekom normalnom životu. Kako je moguće da su ti bolesni umovi tako odjednom počeli da funkcionišu kako tako društvo? Znamo da je Eichmann, da je radio kao običan radnik u fabrici, u jednoj fabrici. Na koji način su oni funkcionisali kao zajednice uopšte i gde je tu uopšte Adolf Hitler bio u toj zajednici i njegova moć i njegovi kontakti?
What you have to realize is that there had been a big German community in Argentina and in Chile, in Patagonia, the bottom half of Latin America, since the 1850s, 1860s, and there were many, many, many Germans in Argentina. I think a lot of people think of Latin America as jungle and, like Brazil, and is just one big jungle. Well, Argentina looks like Europe. And down in the mountains around San Carlos de Bariloche, which is one of the major German colonies there, it looks just like Bavaria. The houses are the same as you would find in Germany. The people speak German. There are German schools there. There are German chocolate shops there. The beer's German. I mean, I wake up when I visit Bariloche and I think, hang on, am I really in Argentina or am I in Germany now? Argentina had its own Nazi party before the war. It's the only other country in the world to have its own Nazi party. there were 60,000 members of the Argentine Nazi Party. That's the Argentine Nazi Party, not the Nazi Party in Argentina. There were even more of those, the Ausland Nazi Party. It was easy for them to blend in. There were already Germans there. The colony was there already. But also, Perón welcomed them. Juan Perón wanted the technology, the inventiveness, the hard work that the Germans could bring to Argentina after the war. People like Kurt Tank, who designed one of the early jet aircraft, went to Argentina. Argentina was the third or fourth nation in the world to have its own jet fighters, the Pulque, completely designed by Nazi team. They tried for a fusion reactor, a nuclear reactor, under an Austrian Nazi scientist called Richter, but it failed. It was a load of rubbish. When you go to Buenos Aires now, you will see that there are still German restaurants everywhere and German bars, and it's an important community there. So they went to stay with friends. Hitler, it seems, was not well when he arrived in Argentina. I think the July bomb plot, the Stauffenberg bomb plot, he'd been hurt worse than we'd been told he was. So for a while he was simply recovering. But by the time that Martin Bormann got there in 1948, because Bormann had been in Germany and in Europe until that time, I think Bormann realized that the Nazi Party was over. You could no longer march behind the swastika. You could no longer wear those neat Hugo Boss designed black uniforms. You could no longer be anti-Semitic. You could no longer murder people industrially. So Hitler became sidelined. He was almost in exile. And that was done by Bormann, because Bormann was running the organization. Bormann was running politics back in Germany. He had the money. I mean, we're talking about money that enabled you to buy countries. It was a huge amount of money. So Hitler falls into disrepair, disregard. Nobody cares anymore, because Germany is rebuilding and everybody's happy. The Americans are happy with Germany because it sits between the Soviet Union and Western Europe. So I think we have a situation where they go to a country where they're welcome, they go to a country where they feel at home, they go to a country that looks like Europe. I mean, Buenos Aires is a European capital in the middle of Latin America. It's you never see a black face in Buenos Aires. It's a very, very white country. And it feels like Paris without the history. It feels like Budapest or Belgrade, the European capital. But it isn't. It's 13,000 miles away across the side of the world.
Koja su vaša bila prva saznanja o Drugom svjetskom ratu? Vaš otac je učestvovao u Drugom svjetskom ratu, čak je bio i ranjen, ali kažete, govorili ste da vam nisu mnogo o tome pričali, da su tek kasnije došla neka saznanja, da se prosto znalo. Naravno da je otac bio u Drugom svjetskom ratu, gledali ste Sobu slavnih u svojoj školi u Južnom Velsu, ali kada su počela ta saznanja da dolaze o tome da je to bilo, da ne merimo sada, ali jedno od najvećih zala 20. veka, da ne merimo sada sa Staljinom ili Mao Tse-tungom ili sa drugima, ali svakako jedna ideologija koja je bila potpuno razarajuća za svet.
I think, like anybody of my generation, I'm the youngest of 4 children, and my elder sister is 12 years older than me, so she would be 65 if she was still alive. When my father came home from the war, my father had fought for 6.5 years, all the way through North Africa, up through Italy. He was wounded in North Africa, wounded again in Italy, and he came back, and then he went in well after D-Day into Europe, and he was in Bruges, in Brussels, when Victory Europe was declared. So my father saw very little fighting on continental Europe apart from in Italy. My father never spoke about the war, ever. We could see the marks on his face and the shrapnel in his arm, but he would never speak about the war to us. But the war was always present in your life when you were growing up in the 1950s. Well, I just made it into 1950s, but in the 60s. So there would be film and comics and everything else. And I'm sure the same was true very much so in Yugoslavia, which had a much worse time than Britain during the war. And I've always had an interest because it was something that my father had gone through. And it was only after I had seen combat as a journalist, never as a soldier, but I had seen combat as a journalist. I'd been cruise missiled by the Americans in Baghdad. I'd been mortared by the Bosnians here. I've been shot at by the Serbs here. I've been chased with machetes in Rwanda and Africa. I've been around. And when I came out of Baghdad after I'd been missiled and we'd had a very bad time, my father looked at me and he said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And he put a bottle of whiskey on the table and he said, "No, you're not. Do you want to talk about it?" And poured me a drink and he had a drink. And then he told me about the war. But this had very little to do with writing Grey Wolf. It's all, the war is a part of anybody in their 50s life. It's what our parents did. My mum was in uniform. My dad was in uniform. My uncles were in uniform. You know, that's what they did. I had never been interested enough as a journalist ever to do a World War II story. I'd always covered the big stories of the international news. But when I came across this story, I got tired of doing international news. I sat down one day in a car park in Baghdad wearing a helmet and a flak jacket, lit up a cigarette, and I thought, I'm just too old. I hit my mid-40s. I'd been doing it for 20 years. I was too old, so I was going to do documentaries. Serious documentaries, and I have made lots of serious documentaries. But then when I saw this story and started to investigate it, I realized that I had to tell it. I'm very angry that this happened. I'm very angry at what they did. I'm very angry that they let this man escape and helped this man to escape. So the story needed telling. I've been a journalist since I was 19. If I hadn't done this, if I hadn't told this story, I would not be being true to myself.
Prosto je jako teško shvatiti da tako skoro istoriji, pak je to bilo 45. godine, to bilo pre 2000. godina, da je tolika nepoznanica ostala iza toga, sa namerom nekoga. Da li danas, ono što mi danas doživljamo, bili ste ratni reporter, gledali ste sukobe u Ruandi, Iraku, pad Sovjetskog saveza, stvaranje Rusije, izveštavali o tome. Da li će za 60 godina neko morati također da utvrđuje šta se u stvari sada događa, odnosno šta se događalo, znači od 2000. godina. Da li mi znamo sve o ratu u Iraku, da li znamo i koliko će ovo naše vreme isto tako možda biti tajna za samo 50 godina?
I think that I haven't really thought deeply about those things, and because I reported on most of them, I'm not sure about the politics behind it. We will find out different things as secret files become available to us. Definitely about the accord that ended the Bosnian War. There is still much to come out about Richard Holcroft, I can't remember his name now, but what he did here. Iraq, they lied. They lied. There were no weapons of mass destruction. And yet Tony Blair and George Bush, who, in my opinion, are both war criminals, and I would like to see them tried in The Hague for killing so many Iraqis and for killing so many British and American soldiers as well. They are war criminals. They lied for why they went to war. But governments lie to us. I mean, you in Serbia know this better than most people, that governments lie to us. Maybe it's not... It's my job. That's what I do. I try and find out the truth about things, or the truth as I can discover it. And I think it's every journalist's job, that even if it's dangerous or it doesn't go with what your government wants you to say, well, I'm sorry, the government don't pay me. No government pays me. I'm a journalist. This is what I do. I try and find out the truth about things. And that's what we've done here. And if people don't like it, I don't care. Don't like it. Read the book. Tell me I'm an idiot. But I don't care. I know what's true.
A o čemu će biti reč u drugoj knjizi, u nastavku ove knjige Sivi Vuk?
The second book gives much more detail about what happened economically after the war. The companies, how Bormann ran the organization, how German intelligence kept the Soviets and the Americans at each other's throats so that Germany could rebuild quietly and without any problems from either side, with a great deal of help from America. And it details even more sightings of Adolf Hitler post-war in Argentina, and more details generally. But it looks very much at how Germany rebuilt and how Germany ran the Cold War, how the Nazis ran the Cold War. Because the idea that there was denazification in Germany and we got rid of the Nazis in Germany is just another myth. It's historically not true. They took off their Hugo Boss designed uniforms and they put on their Hugo Boss designed suits and went back to work. And this is horrendous. This is horrible, but this is what happened. The second book will do that. The second book will show a lot more detail, and I think we will also show the involvement of the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church has always denied that Pope Pius XII knew what was going on. We will show very definitely that the Pope knew exactly what was happening when 100,000 Nazis and fascists came through Vatican City on their way to Latin America, and that it went right to the heart of the Catholic Church, which I'm embarrassed about because I was born a Catholic. I'm not a Catholic, and I haven't been for many years. The film is Hitler's life in Argentina until his death, and then what happened with Martin Bormann and the organization afterwards. So I hope that will get as wide an audience as possible, because I want people to know about this story. People need to know that things aren't the way they're always taught them. I mean, growing up under Tito, under communism here, under communism in the Eastern Bloc, your history is very different to the one that I learned. And I now know that bits of my history were complete and total lies. So how much of yours was?
I za kraj, bitno je govoriti o tim vremenima i koliko i ova knjiga ono što donosi, to je da pokazuje sistem u kojem su učestvovali mnogi centri moći, ali je činjenica da se posljednjih godina postaje čak i moda nacističke organizacije ili fašističke organizacije u Evropi. Da li je moguće da se uopšte pojave čak i neke ozbiljne stranke, partije, ne verujem da negde može da se ponovi Treći rajh, ali koliko je onda bitno govoriti o tome ili to treba da prepustimo istoriji?
We have real problems in Europe at the moment. We have almost 50% unemployment in Spain. We have huge unemployment in Greece. Now both of those countries were fascist not very long ago, and so it would be quite easy for them to turn. It is horrible for me to see things like Polish football supporters using the Hitler salute. Don't they know what happened in their country? That over a third of their country were murdered by these Nazis? People need to remember this must never, ever, ever happen again in Europe. And if that means that we need to show pictures of the concentration camps in our schools all over Europe to the people so that they know what these people were capable of, if we can only show people, because it's not taught so much anymore. My kids in Britain, they're 25 and 21. They're grown up now. They know nothing about this war. They know nothing about this period. It was never taught to them in school. What they know is what I've told them and what from films they've seen. But it's not taught in school. It needs to be taught. This is only in our parents' lifetime that this happened, that the Nazis rampaged through Europe. I mean, look what they did in Serbia. Look what they did, everywhere east of here. It's just a nightmare. So how can anybody in Bulgaria or Hungary or anywhere like that want to emulate the Nazis? They're insane. They're completely mad. Nationalism is a very dangerous thing in Europe, and you guys know it more than anybody. Nationalism is a very dangerous thing, and when nationalism combines with fascism, you have a major problem. But it's up to everybody who watches this program, everybody who reads this book, everybody who has any intelligence at all, to tell their children, to make sure they know themselves how awful it was, and not so long ago.
Hvala lepo.
Knjiga Sivi Vuk, bekstvo Adolfa Hitlera svakako je kontraverzna, ali je jedna od najuzbiljnijih u nizu onih koji tvrde da se Hitler nije ubio 45. I kako kaže Jerard, pročitajte knjigu, pa verujte ili ne verujte. Možda i jeste to pitanje vere, ali otvoreni uvek traži preispitivanje. Uverili se ili ne u ovoj knjizi, ipak svaki čitalac naći će obilje podataka o najvećem zlu koje je skoro progutalo Evropu, nacističkoj eri. Saznaće mnogo o mnogima koji su sarađivali sa nacistima, i to širom takozvanog demokratskog sveta. Saznaće i da je Južna Amerika bila preplavljena nacistima posle Drugog svetskog rata, da su svoje živote mirno skončali pred nosem svih nas. Otkriće kako funkcionišu tajne službe i podsjetit će se da stvarno nikada ne smemo ni da zaboravimo, da uvek moramo da se podsjećamo, pa da ne smemo čak ni da se poigravamo sa tom demonskom ideologijom. Sve ostalo je moguće i dozvoljeno. I vere i uverenje da je Hitler preživeo Berlin 45. Jer svakako čak ni to nije nemoguće.